February 19, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Late afternoon. The mountain corridor was choked with smoke, wrecked vehicles and retreating men. American units, many of them seeing combat for the first time, fell back in confusion under the pressure of German armor and artillery. Radios failed, orders conflicted, officers disappeared. In 6 days of fighting, more than 6,000 American casualties would be counted, killed, wounded, captured. For the Axis commanders watching from higher ground, the conclusion seemed obvious. The Americans were not ready for war. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel observed the collapse with professional detachment. He had broken stronger armies before. What concerned him was not how easily the Americans had been defeated, but how quickly they might change. That night, from his headquarters in Tunisia, Rommel wrote to his wife Lucy. His words were calm, almost dismissive. The American soldier, he said, was poorly trained, soft, overconfident. Their officers lacked experience. Their command structure was rigid and slow. Yet the letter carried a warning. Rommel had seen something beneath the disorder. He had seen numbers, industrial depth, endless trucks, fuel, replacements, and he had learned long ago that wars were not won by first impressions. He cautioned his subordinates not to underestimate an enemy with such resources. The Americans, he believed, would adapt, and when they did, they would do so rapidly. Most of his generals disagreed. German operational reports following Kasserine dismissed the U.S. Army as tactically naive and psychologically fragile. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, commanding Axis forces in Tunisia, saw no reason to alter strategy. The Americans had been tested and found wanting. They would break again. But 3 weeks later, the battlefield would offer a brutal correction. What the Germans could not see from Kasserine Pass was what was happening behind American lines. Commanders were being relieved, doctrine was being relieved, doctrine was being enforced, and at the center of it all stood a general who did not intend to explain failure. His name was George S. Patton. The defeat at Kasserine triggered a quiet crisis inside the American command structure. Confidence evaporated. Senior officers in Washington questioned whether the U.S. Army could fight a modern, mechanized war against Germany at all. In North Africa, British commanders privately doubted their new ally. The losses had not merely been tactical, they were reputational. On March 6, 1943, the decision was made. Major General Lloyd Fredendall was relieved of command of 2nd Corps. His replacement arrived without ceremony. George Smith Patton landed in Tunisia wearing polished boots, ivory-handled pistols, and a reputation for ruthlessness. Within hours, the tone of the American army changed. Patton wasted no time diagnosing the failure. He did not blame the equipment. He did not blame soldiers. He blamed leadership and mindset. The Americans, he believed, had not been defeated by German tanks, but by confusion, hesitation, and the absence of will imposed from the top. His orders were immediate and uncompromising. Officers were forced to the front. Defensive positions were consolidated. Artillery was centralized and rehearsed. Units were forbidden to retreat without permission. Helmets were worn at all times. Slumpiness of dress, of discipline, of language was punished. Patton believed that outward order created inward confidence, and confidence decided battles before they were joined. He spoke constantly, sometimes brutally, to his troops. He did not promise safety, he promised clarity. The enemy, he told them, was not invincible. He was disciplined, experienced, and dangerous but predictable. And predictability could be destroyed by aggression. While Patton reshaped 2 Corps, German intelligence reports continued to echo the conclusions drawn at Kasserine. American units were rebuilding, but slowly. Their officers lacked instinct. Their doctrine remained untested. Von Arnim saw no reason to delay future offensives. Rommel, now increasingly sidelined by illness and strategic disagreement, reiterated his caution. The Americans, he warned, were changing. His warning was noted. It was not acted upon. By mid-March, Patton's transformation had reached every level of command. Orders were shorter. Authority was clearer. Artillery observers rehearsed fire missions repeatedly. Tank units drilled coordinated movement. Retreat plans were replaced with counterattack plans. What Patton demanded above all was initiative action, taken before orders could arrive. The shift was invisible to the Germans. To them, the Americans remained the same army they had shattered weeks earlier. Same uniforms, same weapons, same accents on the radio. The assumption hardened into certainty. When pressed, the Americans would yield ground. On March 20th, 1943, German forces prepared to test that belief. The battlefield would be Guettar. March 23, 1943, Guettar, southern Tunisia. Dawn. German armor moved forward with confidence. The plan was straightforward: penetrate American lines, roll through the valley, and repeat Kasserine. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim committed elements of the 10th Panzer Division, supported by veteran infantry and artillery. It was a measured assault, designed to exploit what German commanders still believed was an inexperienced enemy prone to collapse under pressure. What they encountered instead was silence. American positions at Guettar were dug in with deliberate care. Anti-tank guns were camouflaged and sighted in depth. Artillery batteries had pre-registered every approach road. Forward observers waited with stopwatches, not binoculars. When the first German tanks crested the rise, they did not advance into chaos. They advanced into a trap. Patton's doctrine had been explicit. There would be no premature fire, no panic, no individual heroics. The enemy would be allowed to come forward, to commit, to expose themselves fully. Only then would the line speak. At 8:40 a.m., it did. American artillery opened in controlled, overlapping barrages. Shells fell with mathematical precision. German tanks halted, reversed, advanced again, and were hit from multiple angles. Anti-tank guns engaged at close range. Infantry held their ground. When pressure mounted, American units did not withdraw. They counterattacked locally, exactly as rehearsed. German radio traffic grew urgent. Reports contradicted expectations. The Americans were coordinating fires. Their artillery was accurate. Their infantry was not yielding. Tank losses mounted. By midday, the attack stalled. From his headquarters, von Arnim demanded explanations. He was told the Americans were fighting differently, aggressively, cohesively, with discipline. The same units that had disintegrated at Kasserine were now absorbing punishment and returning it with interest. By nightfall, German losses were unsustainable. More than 30 tanks had been destroyed or disabled. The breakthrough never came. On March 24th, von Arnim ordered a withdrawal. The decision was stunning. For the first time in Tunisia, German forces had attacked American troops and failed decisively. Not because of superior numbers, not because of better equipment, but because the Americans had refused to break. Rommel's earlier warning circulated quietly among German staffs. He had said the Americans would learn. He had said they would adapt faster than expected. Now the evidence lay burning in the valley at Guettar. Patton received the reports without celebration. He knew what this moment meant. Not victory, but credibility. The Americans had proven they could stand, absorb, and strike back. The psychological balance had shifted. For the Germans, something more troubling had become clear. This was no longer an army in training. The withdrawal from Guettar forced a reassessment inside the German command that many officers resisted. For years, experience had taught them that battlefield instinct and superior tactics could overcome material disadvantage. That belief had carried them from Poland to France, from the Balkans to the gates of Moscow. It was a belief grounded in memory, and now challenged by reality. General von Arnim convened his senior officers as reports from the front were compiled. The language had changed. Gone were references to inexperienced Americans. In their place were descriptions of coordinated fires, disciplined defenses, and aggressive local counterattacks. The enemy, it was admitted, had not merely held. He had imposed his will. Rommel, increasingly sidelined but still respected, was vindicated. In later testimony, he would describe the American transformation as rapid and unsettling. They had not waited years to adapt. They had not required new weapons or veteran formations. They had altered leadership, doctrine, and expectations, and done so in less than a month. Captured documents confirmed the shift. American units were now operating under centralized artillery control, a concept the Germans themselves had perfected earlier in the war. Infantry and armor coordination had improved dramatically. Most concerning of all was the change in mindset. American officers were no longer reacting. They were anticipating. German morale suffered accordingly. The certainty that had followed Kasserine dissolved. If the Americans could learn this quickly, what would they look like in 6 months? In a year? With full industrial support and growing combat experience, the implications were impossible to ignore. Patton pressed his advantage, but with restraint. He did not chase dramatic victories. He demanded consistency. Failures were corrected immediately. Successes were standardized. The goal was not brilliance but reliability. He understood that wars were won not by moments, but by systems that could be repeated under pressure. In private, Patton wrote that discipline was the foundation of courage. Without it, bravery was wasted. With it, even inexperienced soldiers could defeat veterans. This belief shaped every order he issued. By April 1943, Axis forces in Tunisia were retreating steadily under combined Allied pressure. The Americans were no longer the weak link. They were becoming an equal partner. German commanders took note and prepared for a future in which the United States would not merely participate in the war, but dominate it. The assumptions formed at Kasserine had been shattered, and with them, a dangerous illusion. After the war, when German generals were asked where the balance had truly shifted, many pointed not to Normandy or the Rhine, but to Tunisia. General Hasso von Manteuffel would later say that the Americans were the fastest-learning enemy the German army ever faced. They absorbed defeat, corrected it, and returned stronger. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring echoed the sentiment. The mistake, he admitted, was believing early victories revealed permanent truth. They did not. The transformation of the American army in 1943 was not technological. The tanks at Guettar were largely the same as those lost at Kasserine. The soldiers were the same men. What had changed was the command, expectations, the willingness to impose discipline and demand aggression in equal measure. Rommel had understood this first. His warning to his wife and to his subordinates was not praise, it was recognition. He knew that an army backed by immense industrial power could not afford to remain incompetent for long. Once it learned how to fight, it would be relentless. At Guettar, that future announced itself. German withdrawals continued across Tunisia. By May 1943, more than 250,000 Axis troops would surrender, ending the North African campaign. The defeat marked the loss of an entire theater and exposed southern Europe to invasion. It also marked the beginning of a new strategic reality. The United States was no longer an untested participant. It was becoming the central force of the Allied war effort. What happened in those 21 days mattered far beyond Patton or Rommel. It demonstrated that doctrine and leadership could outweigh experience, that armies were not fixed entities, and that adaptability was the most dangerous weapon of all. The Germans had won at Kasserine and drawn the wrong conclusion. They ignored Rommel's warning because it challenged their pride. At Guettar, they paid for that mistake. This was not simply a battle lost. It was an era ending.